You need to prepare yourself for some awesome gravestones because once you start this project, you're not going to want to stop. The possibilities are endless, and it starts right now on Tabletop Witchcraft. Hey there, and welcome back to Tabletop Witchcraft. This week, we're making some gravestones on 1-inch miniature bases as scatter terrain pieces. These are so much fun to make because the possibilities really are endless. You can go online and with a little bit of research in a few minutes, you can find a ton of different designs to make. I made a lot of these out of green stuff. We're going to sculpt them in this video, as well as some wooden ones out of toothpicks. And you can decorate these with cut up leftover bits and pieces of miniatures that you might have for like skeletons, or you can use swords or shields or whatever you want to decorate on all these gravestones. Let me show you what I made. So let's go grab some supplies and let's get crafting. Alright, so we're going to start out by grabbing some green stuff, mixing this up, and I like to get about enough of this to make 2 to 3 tombstones at a time. You really have a lot of time to work with this, but I find that it gets a little stiff, if you do too much more than that all at once. So once you have this mixed up, spread it out onto a piece of glass. That's really what you want to be working on here. It keeps it from moving around on you, and you can really scrape it off easily with a straight edge razor once you're done with the project. The main thing you want to be concerned with when you're working on this is getting the thickness of the tombstone even throughout. And once you have that, you really can come up with any design you want. Head online, there are a ton of designs you can come up with just a little bit of research. And the basic tools here are these clay sculpting tools to add some little text and some designs in the tombstones, as you can see here, and a X-Acto knife to do all of your carving. And you can wait a little bit once you have the green stuff spread out onto the glass to start working with it. It makes it a little bit easier. Now don't worry about little bits of green stuff left on the glass that are attached to the tombstone itself. That will all come off very easily in 24 hours once we go to peel these off of the glass. Now, not all of these tombstones need to be made as one solid piece. Some of them, like this, are going to be easier made as 2 separate pieces. This will be a base or foundation to that cross section. And we cut the hole out in it ahead of time to make it easier so we're not boring out a whole huge section once it's hardened. Now for this section, we're going to make a pedestal tombstone, like a little spire, and we're going to just put a little bit of copper on the inside to help hold it in place, as you can see here, to hold it upright while it's curing. And one major thing you want to make sure to do, the tools that you work with, your fingers, you want to make sure to keep them damp while you're working with the green stuff. That way it doesn't stick to it. Now, not only are we going to make tombstones out of green stuff, we're also going to use some toothpicks. They're really good to scale in size, and I put a little bit of black paint on them, and I'm painting these up in the same way that I did the fence post that I made. I'll put a link up above to that video. This is a really nice weathered effect for wood. It's one of my favorite ways of doing it. And as you can see, it's super easy to peel these off 24 hours later and clean up these edges with a knife once you're done. And all that little bit that's left on the glass scrapes off real nice and easy and ready for your next time you're going to use it. And obviously the back side of these tombstones are going to be perfectly flush because we did it on the glass. No issue. Take a file, round them off, and you're good to go. And here are the dimensions for the wooden grave markers. And I like to just break these, indent them a little bit with a pair of wire cutters or jeweler's pliers, and then just snap them. It gives it a nice rough aged look. And this is just a little bit of super glue, and then I touch the wood with some accelerant and it instantly cures it and allows you to keep moving along on the project. Now this is butcher's twine that I've stripped down to just one strand. Usually it comes in maybe 6 to 7 strands. This is just one strand of that wire, painted in a tan color. And I use a little bit of super glue just to hold it in place. Okay, now for the base, we got to add a little bit of super glue because the clay that we're going to use, the modeling clay, doesn't have any like adhesive properties, so it would come right off of this base once it's cured. So a little bit of super glue, and then you can build right on top of it. No need to wait. You can go ahead as soon as the super glue's on there. And I'll have a link in the description below as to the clay that I'm using, the green stuff, all the tools and items. If you want to pick up any of these items on Amazon, again, there'll be a link in the description below. Now I'm grabbing my favorite sculpting tool, texturing tool. We'll just add a little texture there for some mud effect. And I like to kind of tap these holes with whatever tombstone I'm using ahead of time to make it easier to apply them once the clay is cured. Now for some embellishments, we're going to take a Reaper cat for one of our tombstones. We're going to use a skeleton for another. And all we want is the skeleton. We're going to cut that spear off. And then we're going to go to our trusty box of Citadel skulls and snap a few skulls off, because what tombstone would be complete without skulls laying around, right? Now these miniatures cut really easy with those jeweler's pliers. Now there's a guy on Instagram that I follow who does some really amazing work. His name is Paint Squig 1980, and he did a miniature that I thought was really awesome a while ago. It was a skeleton that he had some grass growing out of its head, and I thought that was totally awesome. So I want to go ahead and put one of those features on one of my gravestones. So if you haven't seen his work on Instagram, go check him out. Alright, now we're taking another skull, and we're going to cut the back half of the head off. I did paint this up, assuming I was going to put it as a skull in the graveyard, but I decided I wanted this pedestal to look a little bit more interesting, so we're going to add it to that. The cat I painted black. I did a light dry brush with some tan, some light gray. And I thought that would be kind of a cool touch, having the cat touch the tombstone like its former owner was buried there. Okay, now this is a cavalry base by Reaper. And we're going to do something really cool with that skeleton here in just a second. Using this clay sculpting tool just to push back the clay, and we're going to have it look like this skeleton is crawling right out of the ground, coming right at you. This might be a little situational, this one, but I couldn't resist doing this. I just had the idea, and I'm like, yeah, totally got to do it. Now this clay is really easy to work with. It's fun to work with, but it does tend to crack a little bit on you, and it is a little, I guess, brittle once it cures. So all I like to do is just take a little bit of Mod Podge and paint right over it. Again, it doesn't matter if you get it on the green stuff or not, and that Mod Podge really seals in that clay nice and solid. And we're going over a nice paint job on the skull there just to make it look like that's part of the gravestone. Now when we go to paint the base, again, you can make these look like they're in any environment. I wanted this to be kind of a mucky, dark, dingy, almost like a rainy night sort of effect to this graveyard. So we're going with a really dark, muddy looking colors. This is just a known oil that I'm using to wash all the gravestones. And that's Agrax Earthshade for the dirt. And we're going to cover a lot of this up with some other effects here. So you're really not going to see much of it, but we want to make sure we do the best we can on it for any parts that do show later on. And here we just do a nice kind of an edge highlight / dry brush on all of the gravestones. Alright, now for some more effects, we're going to add a little bit of straight PVA glue, and we'll add it around the edge. And this is a time where you get to really kind of conceal any areas that you weren't crazy about before. So by adding a little bit of that PVA glue, we can then go ahead and add some pigments of some brown and black and mix those into that mud effect to really add some contrast around the base. Now this is some Vallejo thick mud, and we're going to just slap this around the hole that the skeleton's coming out of. And obviously we're going to have to add some to the skeleton itself because he just dug himself out of this hole. And you just want to be a little bit careful with how much you put on here. That way you don't cover up the nice paint job that you had applied earlier. If you're curious how I painted this skeleton too, you can check out my tree that I made earlier. It's a hangman's tree, which I do a couple of different skeletons in that one, painted up. I'll put a link up above to that video. And for the wood, all I'm doing here is a mixture of some green fine turf and some burnt grass mixed together with some PVA glue, and I'm going to put that up on the wood to make it look like it's got some moss growing on it. Now we're going to cover up some of this brown base with some static grass. No need for obviously an applicator. It really does a decent job. Just press it on there lightly, and you'll be surprised with how much grass actually sticks to that glue and stays upright. And again, this is a great time to conceal any cracks that you might have in the clay or any screw-ups you might have in a paint job or anything like that. That is a dab of super glue that we're going to use to apply the skull. And as you can see, that skull, the back half of his head is still gray from where I had him in the tack when I was painting him. And don't stress out about stuff like that. Again, we can obviously touch it up, or we can add some grass around the skull to hide that. And this is just a base where I had it look like the tomb. The grave, I guess, was actually open and ready for a burial. And now we can apply the cat to this base. Again, held in place with just a little bit of super glue. Okay, now I didn't want this whole piece to be super dark. I needed some kind of a contrast to brighten it up and make a few things really stick out on it. So we're going with some leaf litter by Green Stuff World. And I'm holding this in place with super glue. And you want to make sure to cover up the super glue with these leaves because it will dry white. Alright, now this is my attempt at paint squigs grass out of the skull here. And I'm just going to take a little tuft and stick it right into the skull with a little bit of super glue. And here's another little grass tuft we're going to stick on the back side of this tomb. Now keep in mind, not every single piece you add has to be dead center or front and center on these bases. It's nice to have, you know, some effects or some pieces you can add to it behind the tombstones, right? Make things interesting from not just the front, but from 360 degrees around. And that's just a 3/4 inch washer held under the base with some tack. And this mini mount, I guess, is just a 1-inch dowel with a magnet that I have super glued into it, and it helps me paint the rim on my minis when I'm done painting them. Alright, now, like I said earlier, I wanted this to be like a dingy, wet, mucky, kind of rainy night effect for these tombstones. So I'm going to add a little bit of Vallejo water texture to the hole here. Just enough to make it look wet, and we don't really want to cover the skull all the way. Here we go with some more detail. I wanted to add a little bit more color, but again, keep it somewhat eerie on this piece here. So I went with a purple flower on the side of the tombstone. Again, you can add any color you want, you know, blue, white, whatever, but I just thought purple went really well with this little scene here. And this was some scrap that I had that came with those purple flowers, and it looks more like phlox, if you're familiar with that flower, like a ground cover. So I decided to just throw that right on this piece. And then I grabbed a few red flowers and finished up with using those. So, just like there's a ton of different ideas and designs for the gravestones themselves, there's a ton of different ways that you can decorate these little pieces, and we'll really have somebody looking at each individual one for quite a while. You can add shrubs, flowers, rose bushes to them, and each piece doesn't have to be in, you know, a summer setting or environment. You can have ones that are in a desert, you could have ones that are in an icy environment, and you can hang icicles from the gravestones. There are so many different possibilities. Leave a comment below. Let me know what your favorite gravestone was that you saw in the video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and please consider heading on over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It really is support over on Patreon and the other methods like picking up some merchandise that really helps fund the channel and helps it evolve and grow. So until next time, I'll see you around.